The widow reached Elias Reed's ranch before dawn, carrying a half-frozen boy beneath her torn wool. 3 riders were already climbing the ridge behind. She fell against the barn door and pressed a sealed letter into it. "Please hide my son." Then the boy's sleeve slipped back. Elias saw the dark, crescent-shaped birthmark on his wrist, the same mark his dead brother had carried since birth. Before he could open the letter, a rifle shot split the morning air. Clara Whitmore reached Reed Hollow before dawn with snow inside her torn boots and her 6-year-old son hidden beneath her coat. 3 lanterns followed her along the ridge, drawing closer through the storm. She struck the barn door with her last strength. Elias Reed opened it with a lamp in one hand and a rifle in the other. Clara nearly collapsed across the throat. Blood marked her lip, but she would not release the child. "Please hide my son." She pushed a sealed letter into Elias's palm. The boy stirred, and his sleeve slipped back, revealing a dark crescent-shaped birthmark. Elias went still. His brother Nathan had carried the same mark in the same place. Nathan had been declared dead 6 years earlier, though no body had ever returned. A lantern appeared beyond the fence. Elias saw the broken reed seal. A rifle cracked across the field, and a bullet struck the post beside Clara's head. He pulled them inside and barred the door. Behind the barred barn door, Clara listened as the riders moved beyond the fence. Their horses passed slowly through the snow, as if the men knew she had nowhere. Elias guided her and Sam toward the house without demanding an explanation. In the kitchen, he placed dry blankets near the stove, warmed milk for the boy, and left clean clothes outside the spare room. He did not ask why armed men were hunting them. He only made certain the doors were locked, and Sam. Clara refused to eat until her son had finished. Even then, she stayed near the doorway, as though comfort might become another debt someone could. 3 days earlier, she had possessed a room, a few dollars, and the right to use the name Whitmore. Thomas Whitmore had not been the love of her. He had been a decent man, willing to protect a woman already condemned by people who knew nothing. Years earlier, he had offered Clara his name after learning she carried the child of a man who had disappeared. Thomas understood what happened to unmarried mothers in towns ruled by respectable. They lost work, shelter, and the right to be believed. Their marriage had been quiet. Clara kept his books, cared for his sick mother, and brought order to his failing horse business. Thomas gave her and Sam a roof, legal respectability, and the freedom to mourn a man whose name they rarely spoke. There had been no grand romance between them, but there had been trust. When Thomas died after falling from his horse, that trust was buried before the soil over his grave had settled. His brother Vernon arrived with Silas Crow before Clara returned from the cemetery. They opened Thomas's desk, removed the account books, and changed the lock on the house. Crow claimed the county had no valid record of Clara's marriage. Vernon called her a servant who had deceived a lonely man. Together, they took the house, horses, savings, and nearly everything Thomas had owned. Clara asked only for Sam's clothes and the wooden horse he slept beside. Vernon allowed her one small case, then searched it before the workers as though she were a thief. The next morning, Crow accused her outside the church of stealing a business letter. Vernon claimed she had kidnapped Sam, though he had never treated the boy as family while Thomas lived. The townspeople watched from the church steps. Some lowered their eyes. Others stared with the relief of people grateful that disgrace had chosen someone else. Clara did not beg them to believe. She took Sam's hand, lifted the case from the mud, and walked away while Crow warned that the law would find her. What he did not know was that Clara had expected him to search the case. The papers he wanted were hidden elsewhere. A page from Thomas's private ledger had been sewn into the hem of her dress. Nathan Reed's sealed letter rested beneath the lining of her coat. The wooden horse Sam carried held something Nathan had once said would open the truth if he failed to return. Clara spent the first night in an abandoned line shack. Before sunrise, she heard riders searching the. By noon, Vernon's men had questioned every household between Ash Creek. She avoided the main trail and carried Sam whenever the snow grew too deep. She had eaten nothing since the funeral meal. Twice, she considered hiding the letter and sending the boy toward Reed Hollow. Each time, Sam reached for her hand in his sleep. That was why she kept. Nathan had once described Reed Hollow as a narrow valley guarded by cottonwoods, with an east-facing barn and a creek beneath the western. He had said his older brother was stern, lonely, and more honorable. Clara remembered every word because Nathan had planned to bring her. He never had the chance. 6 years earlier, Crow announced that Nathan had been killed by robbers. No body came home. No saddle, coat, or personal belongings were returned. There was only a statement signed by 2 men Clara had. She wanted to tell Elias everything when he opened the barn door, but fear stopped her. If she claimed Sam was Nathan's son without proof, Elias might think she had invented the story to gain. If Crow had already altered the county records, even the truth could sound like a desperate. So Clara told Elias only what he needed to know. The riders would return. Crow would bring legal papers. Vernon would call her dangerous. Sam would be taken if anyone accepted their claims without examining the evidence. Elias listened in silence. His expression revealed little, but his eyes hardened when Clara explained that Vernon had spoken of Sam as security for Thomas's debts. Then Clara noticed an auction notice beside Elias's account. Reed Hollow was to be sold in less than 2 weeks. The debt belonged to Silas Crow. She stepped closer and studied the page after Elias gave. The interest had been charged twice for the same. A livestock payment had been recorded as missed. The total included a fee that did not legally exist on the date shown. Then she saw the signature. The long final stroke, the narrow capital R, and the small break where the pen had lifted were all familiar. She had seen that hand in letters, brief notes, and the message hidden beneath her coat. Clara looked up at Elias. The signature did not belong to him. It belonged to Nathan. Elias did not ask Clara to explain Nathan's signature. He folded the auction notice beside the sealed letter and told her the storm had closed the eastern road. She and Sam could remain at Reed Hollow until it opened. It was not a promise beyond that, but Clara accepted it. The spare room had belonged to Elias's mother. The furniture was plain, the quilt faded, and the window faced the barn. Elias left clean clothes outside the door, then walked away before Clara. He did not enter without permission or wait nearby for thanks. Before sunrise, Clara lit the kitchen stove and made biscuits. When Elias entered, coffee was steaming and Sam sat near the fire in a borrowed shirt. "You don't owe me work," Elias said. Clara kept her eyes on the skillet. "I owe you food, blankets, and a locked door. You needed those things. That does not make them free." Elias understood. She was not rejecting kindness. She was protecting the last part of herself that still belonged only to her. He nodded toward a chair. "Then eat before you pay me back." Amos Pike entered before she could answer. He had managed Reed Hollow for nearly 10 years and wore his authority openly. His gaze moved from Sam's shirt to. He warned Elias that she had brought armed riders to a ranch, already losing cattle and falling behind on payments. Reed Hollow could not survive another burden. Clara did not lower her. She said she and Sam would leave when the road opened. Until then, she would work for every meal. Amos asked whether keeping books had helped Thomas Whitmore remain alive. The kitchen fell silent. Elias set down his cup. His voice stayed calm. "She is a guest in this house. Speak to her that way, or do not speak to her." Amos left, but the look he gave Clara promised the matter. Later, Sam followed Elias into the barn. A young chestnut horse stood nervous in the nearest stall. The boy watched from behind a post and refused to approach. Elias crouched beside him instead of pulling him. He showed Sam how to hold out a flat hand. The horse chose when to come closer. Sam smiled when its warm breath touched his finger. Clara watched from the doorway. Other men had told Sam to stop being. Elias allowed him to remain frightened without making him ashamed. When the horse shifted suddenly, Sam stepped back and called, "Nathan." Elias froze. The boy explained that his mother had told him about a man named Nathan who sang while riding and had promised to take them to a valley filled with cotton. Elias looked toward Clara. Nathan had described Reed Hollow that way since childhood. She said nothing. Her fingers tightened around the coat hiding the sealed. Clara noticed the horse favoring its left foot. Elias assumed the cold had stiffened it, but she asked him to lift the hoof. A dark swelling showed beside them. She said a sharp stone had worked into the tender. If left there, the infection could spread. Elias called a ranch hand. When the shoe came off, Clara was right. Amos returned while they cleaned the wound. He insisted the horse had been checked 2 days earlier. Clara asked who had examined it. Amos answered that he had. For the first time, Elias looked at his manager with doubt. That evening, Clara noticed sales records near the. Several cattle numbers had been changed in darker. Amos entered, closed the book, and said ranch business did not concern her. Clara stepped away. She had survived long enough to know that a guilty man often guarded ordinary paper more fiercely than. After Sam fell asleep, Elias returned the letter. Clara explained that it should be opened only before the sheriff. If Crow accused them of changing it, the unbroken seal would protect the truth. Elias accepted her decision. Before leaving, he asked why Sam knew so much about. Clara said only that some men left behind more than the world ever learned. Later, Elias entered Nathan's old. Dust covered the desk, and his brother's coat still hung on the wall. Sam's wooden horse rested where the boy had forgotten. Elias turned the toy over. Beneath the faded paint were 2 letters carved in the uneven style Nathan had used since boy. And R. The horse had not merely belonged to. He had made it. Clara began with the smallest account book Elias owned. It contained feed purchases, lamp oil, horseshoe nails, and wages for the ranch hands. Nothing in it appeared important enough to steal. That was why Elias allowed her to examine it while he worked nearby. Within an hour, Clara found 3 payments for the same shipment. The dates were different, but the amount, weight, and wagon number were identical. One invoice carried Amos Pike's initials. Another carried the name of a merchant Clara knew had closed his business the previous winter. She did not accuse anyone. Instead, she copied the figures onto a clean page and asked Elias how much grain remained in the storage. Together, they counted the sacks. Reed Hollow had paid for nearly 1/3 more feed than it had received. Elias studied the missing amount in silence. Amos had managed the ranch since before Nathan disappeared. He had eaten at the Reed table, buried cattle beside Elias during hard winters, and once ridden through the night to bring a doctor. Suspicion did not erase those memories. It only made them hurt. Clara returned to the account book. She understood that one mistake proved little. A pattern proved more. Over the next 2 days, she worked in the kitchen, helped with Sam, and examined only the papers Elias placed before. She never entered his office without permission. She never opened a drawer that had not been. Still, her knowledge unsettled him. She understood livestock prices from 6 years earlier. She knew how creditors hid illegal charges inside ordinary fees. She recognized that some deeds separated ownership of land from the right to draw water. But when Elias asked where she had learned those things, Clara said Thomas had trusted her with his books. That answer was true. It was not complete. She also knew them because Nathan had once shown her how Crow acquired ranches that were not truly in debt. Clara continued to startle at every unfamiliar horse. When hoofbeats sounded near the house, she moved Sam away from the windows before asking who had arrived. At night, she checked the latch twice and slept with her boots beside the bed. Sam noticed. One evening, he asked whether they were safe now. Clara held him beneath the faded quilt and said Elias would not let anyone enter with. She could not promise more. Outside the room, Elias heard the. He did not interrupt. He sat on the floor against the opposite wall until Sam stopped whispering and the house grew. The next morning, Elias took an old wooden box from his father's desk. Inside were family papers, military records, and a small brass stamp once used to seal private letters. The stamp carried the Reed initial surrounded by 3 cottonwood leaves. The seal on Clara's letter matched it. More important was the broken coin. Nathan had dropped the stamp on a stone floor when he was 19. A small piece of the outer ring had cracked away, leaving a triangular gap in every seal he made out. The same gap appeared in the black wax beneath Clara's coat line. Elias placed the stamp beside the unopened letter. Clara's face changed when she saw it. For a moment, relief overcame. Then she drew the letter closer. "It is his," Elias said. "Yes." "Then let me read it." "Not yet." The refusal stung more than he expected. Clara explained that Crow would accuse them of opening the letter, changing its contents, and sealing it again. If Sheriff Mercer witnessed the seal being broken, Crow would lose that argument. Elias wanted the truth about his brother more than he had wanted anything in 6 years. Still, he returned the letter to her. Her shoulders lowered slightly. It was the first time Clara understood that Elias would respect a boundary even when it caused him pain. Later that afternoon, she found an old survey rolled behind a shelf in the ranch office. The paper showed Reed Hollow before the western pasture. A blue line crossed the abandoned field and continued toward 3 neighboring ranches. Clara traced it with one finger. "That is the old creek." Elias said the creek had dried before Nathan disappeared. Clara shook her head. A handwritten note beside the line granted the Reed family permanent access to an underground spring. The newer county map contained no such. Someone had not merely forgotten it. Someone had removed it. If the spring still existed, Crow would gain control of the valley's most reliable water source by taking Reed. Elias looked toward the window. Beyond the barn, snow covered the western pasture. For years, he had believed Crow wanted his cattle, and now the debt made greater sense. The ranch itself was only the water was the key. When Amos entered, Clara rolled the survey closed. He asked what they were studying. Elias told him it was an old boundary. Amos's gaze shifted too quickly toward the western pasture. That night, someone entered. Nothing obvious was missing, but the drawer containing the auction notice stood open. Mud marked the floor beneath the desk. Clara checked the letter. It remained hidden. Elias checked the survey. It was gone. Before dawn, Sheriff Daniel Mercer arrived with snow on his shoulders and a folded order in his hand. Silas Crow had accused Clara of stealing documents from the Whitmore estate and demanded her arrest. Mercer did not place her in chains. He knew Elias well enough to ask questions first. Clara placed Nathan's sealed letter on. The sheriff examined the broken reed mark and went still. He had seen the same seal once before, attached to evidence that vanished from the county office 6 years earlier. As he reached for the letter, a floorboard creaked beyond the kitchen. Someone else was listening. The sound beyond the kitchen belonged to Amos Pike. He stepped into view with a lantern in one hand and claimed he had come to check the stove. Sheriff Mercer looked at the mud on Amos's boots, then at the clean floor between the back door and the kitchen. No one accused him. Not yet. Clara understood that suspicion was useful only when it led to proof. She asked Elias to let her finish examining the ranch accounts before Crow returned with stronger papers. Elias agreed. They began with the feed shed. Every sack was weighed and counted. Clara compared the amount in storage with the invoices Amos had approved. Reed Hollow had paid for 42 sacks that had never reached the ranch. Some of the remaining sacks carried old stitching beneath newer labels. Someone had emptied them, refilled them with cheaper grain, and charged Elias the full price. The loss was serious, but Clara knew it was not enough to destroy a ranch by itself. She moved to the cattle records. The winter ledger listed 23 animals as dead from exposure. Elias remembered finding only 8 carcasses after the worst storm. Amos had explained that wolves and drifting snow had carried away the rest. Clara asked the ranch hands to describe the missing cattle. Several wore the reed notch in the left ear and a half-moon braid. The description matched animals sold in Coldwater under the name of a trading company connected to Silas Crow. Elias's jaw tightened as each number fell into place. Amos had not merely neglected. He had been bleeding it slowly enough to make failure look natural. Clara spread the records across the dining room. She marked every false purchase, missing animal, and unexplained payment with a small piece of charcoal. By noon, dark marks covered 3 months of accounts. One ranch hand asked how she could see what experienced men had missed. Clara answered that men often looked for one large theft. A careful thief preferred many small ones. She did not say that she had learned this while helping Nathan investigate. The work moved outside. Clara noticed the chestnut mare shifting her weight in the stall. The hoof wound had been cleaned, but the animal's breathing had become shallow. Clara placed a hand beneath its jaw and felt heat spreading along the leg. She ordered warm water, clean cloth, and a poultice of salt and crushed willow bark. Amos said she was wasting supplies on an animal unlikely to survive. Elias ignored him. Clara stayed beside the mare through the afternoon, changing the cloth whenever it cooled. She spoke softly, not because she believed the horse understood every word, but because fear made all living creatures listen for her. By evening, the swelling had begun to. The mare drank. A ranch hand who had called Clara a burden the day before removed his hat and thanked her. She accepted the words without triumph. There was still too much left to save. At dusk, the wind turned north. Clara walked the fence line with Elias and noticed several posts leaning near the ridge. Snow had hidden the rot at their bases. Elias said the fence had been repaired in autumn. Clara pressed her boot against one post. It broke beneath the surface. The next storm drove the herd north. The entire line would collapse. The cattle would scatter toward the ravine where frightened animals could break legs or freeze. Elias called every available. They worked by lantern light, replacing posts and stretching new wire until their gloves froze stiff. Amos insisted the repairs could wait. Elias asked why a fence recorded as newly repaired was rotten beneath the snow. Amos had no answer. The storm struck before midnight. Wind pushed the herd toward the ridge exactly as Clara had feared. The new posts bent, but the cattle crowded together behind the fence instead of spilling into the ravine. From the barn doorway, Elias watched the animals settle. Without Clara, Reed Hollow could have lost half its remaining herd in a single night. By morning, no one called her. Clara returned to the old survey. The original had vanished, but she had copied the western boundary before it was taken. She led Elias past the repaired fence to a low stretch of pasture where snow formed a thin, uneven crust. She knelt and placed her palm against the ground. The soil beneath was warmer than the frozen earth. Elias dug with a spade. Less than 2 feet down, they found wet gravel. A narrow thread of water moved beneath the ice. The creek had not died. Someone had buried its channel. They followed the damp ground toward an abandoned stone trough. Beneath layers of brush, Clara found an iron marker stamped with the Reed seal. The marker proved the waterline had once been surveyed as part of the ranch. If restored, the spring could supply Reed Hollow through a dry summer and serve the neighboring ranches that now depended on Crow's well. That was why Crow wanted the land. Not for cattle, for control. When they returned to the house, Sam was waiting with the wooden horse in his hands. He had shaken it and heard something move inside. Elias examined the toy but found no visible. Clara remembered Nathan saying it would unlock the truth. She ran her thumb along the carved mane and pressed a narrow piece of wood near the tail. A hidden panel slid open. Inside was a small brass key. Before they could decide what it opened, Elias heard the office door close. Amos stood at the end of the hall with a ledger beneath his coat. He ran for the back door. Elias caught him before he reached the porch. The ledger fell open across the floor, revealing a page Clara had not seen before. At the top was Silas Crow's name. Below it were payments to Amos for cattle, false invoices, and copies of Reed documents. The final payment carried a date from 6 years early. It was the same day Crow announced that Nathan Reed was dead. Amos stopped struggling when he saw the ledger open on the floor. Elias held him by the coat while Clara gathered the loose pages. The records were incomplete, but the pattern was clear. Amos had received money from Crow for years. Some payments followed missing. Others appeared beside copied signatures and altered surveys. The oldest entry carried Nathan's name. Elias wanted answers, but Amos refused to give them. He claimed Crow had paid him only for information and that he knew nothing about Nathan's death. Sheriff Mercer took Amos to Coldwater before sunset. As the wagon disappeared beyond the ridge, Reed Hollow became quieter than it had been in years. The danger had not passed. Still, something heavy had been removed from the house. The following morning, Clara found a cup of coffee beside the account books. Elias was already outside with the ranch hand. He had left no note, but the coffee contained a little sugar, exactly as she preferred it. The next morning, another cup waited. By the 4th day, it had become a habit neither of them mentioned. Clara repaired Elias's coat in the evenings. The wool was worn through at one elbow, and a long tear crossed the shoulder. She mended only what was necessary, leaving the older marks untouched. When Elias noticed, he asked why she had not covered every scar in the cloth. "Because some damage has already learned how to hold," she said. He looked at the coat for a long moment before putting it on. As the weather softened, Elias began teaching Sam to ride the chestnut mare Clara had saved. The horse was still recovering, so he led her slowly around the corral. Sam sat rigid in the saddle. Elias kept one hand near the boy's boot, but did not hold him in place. "You can step down whenever you choose," he said. Sam asked whether brave people ever wanted to stop. "Every day." The boy considered that answer, then remained in the saddle for another circle. Clara watched from the fence. When Sam finally smiled and raised one hand from the saddle horn, a laugh escaped her before she could stop it. Elias turned toward the sound. It was small and brief, but it changed her face. For the first time since she had reached Reed Hollow, she looked younger than her. That afternoon, Elias cut his palm while replacing a broken hinge. Clara found him wrapping the injury with a strip torn from an old feed sack. She took the cloth away and led him to the kitchen. The cut was deep but clean. She washed it and wrapped it with proper bandage while Elias sat in silence. Most men Clara had known treated pain as a con. Elias simply allowed her to help. His hand rested in hers, rough and warm. Neither of them moved when the bandage was finished. Then a door closed somewhere in the house, and Clara released him. 2 nights later, rain struck the barn roof in hard, sudden waves. Clara had gone to check the mare when thunder rolled across the valley. A board fell in the loft. The sharp crack sent her against the stall wall. Her breath vanished. For one terrible instant, the barn became the road outside Ash Creek, and the falling board became a rifle. Elias entered moments later. He saw her pressed against the wood and stopped several feet away. He did not reach for her or tell her to come. He sat on an overturned bucket. The rain filled the silence between them. Slowly, Clara's breathing returned. "You knew not to touch me," she said. "I knew you needed the choice." She looked toward the open barn door. I had forgotten what it felt like to be spoken to gently. Elias lowered his eyes to his bandaged hand. "No one owes me kindness." "No," he said, "but I know what it costs to live with." They remained there while the storm passed, saying nothing. The next morning, Clara entered Nathan's old room for the first time. Elias had placed the wooden horse and the brass key on the desk. Nathan's coat still hung beside the window. Dust covered the shoulders, but Clara recognized the repaired cuff. She had sewn it years earlier. Elias saw her touch the fabric. "You knew him well," he said. Clara could no longer deny it. She told him that Nathan had discovered Crow was buying false debts and using them to seize water rights. He intended to bring the evidence to Coldwater and then return for Clara and Sam. Elias asked why Nathan had never told his family. "He wanted proof before he brought danger to your door." "And the boy?" Clara looked toward the hallway, where Sam's footsteps moved above the... Her answer was ready. Before she could speak, a shadow crossed beneath the door. Clara went silent. Elias opened it, but the hallway was empty. Only a trail of wet mud led toward the back entrance. Someone had been listening again. That evening, Sam carried the brass key to Nathan's room. He had noticed a small iron box beneath the bed and wondered whether the key might open it. Elias pulled the box into the light. The key fit. Inside lay a folded map, several receipts, and a narrow journal bound. The first pages contained ranch figures. The later ones named Crow, Amos, and 3 county officials. One page had been torn out. Clara reached for the hem of her dress. The fragment she had carried from Ash Creek matched the missing edge. On it, in Nathan's handwriting, were the words Elias had waited 6 years to read. "If I do not return, protect Clara and my son." The words in Nathan's journal changed the silence inside. Elias read the sentence twice, then a third time, as if the meaning might shift if he stared. "Protect Clara and my son." Across the room, Clara stood with one hand resting on Sam's. She had imagined this moment for 6 years, yet now that the truth was before Elias, she could not tell whether it had brought relief or another kind of danger. Elias closed the journal carefully. He did not ask whether Sam was truly Nathan's child. The handwriting had answered that. He asked only why Clara had carried the truth alone for so long. Before she could reply, hoofbeats rolled across the frozen ground outside. Not one rider. Many. Elias moved to the window. A line of horses approached through the front gate, led by Silas Crow. Vernon Whitmore rode beside him. Sheriff Mercer followed several paces behind, his expression grim. 2 strangers carried rifles across their saddles. Amos Pike sat in the final wagon with his wrists bound, but he would not look toward the house. Crow dismounted as if Reed Hollow. He held a leather case beneath one arm and called Elias into the yard. His voice carried clearly enough for every ranch hand to hear. Elias stepped outside alone. Clara followed with Sam despite his warning glance. She had spent too many years allowing powerful men to tell her where she was permitted to stand. Crow opened the leather case. The first document was an order accusing Clara of stealing property from the Whitmore estate. The second granted Vernon temporary guardianship of Sam. The third announced that Reed Hollow would be auctioned at noon the following day to settle its unpaid debt. Crow said the law had finally caught up with a dishonest woman and a reckless rancher. Vernon looked past Elias toward Sam. He spoke of the child as though discussing a horse that had strayed from its owner. Clara moved in front of her son. Vernon claimed Thomas had raised the boy and that the Whitmore family therefore possessed the strongest right. Yet, when Sheriff Mercer asked for Sam's birth date, Vernon gave. When asked the name of the doctor who attended his birth, he could not answer. Crow interrupted before the questions continued. He said such details did not matter. The papers carried a county seal, and Clara had already proven herself willing to hide records and invent marriage. Several townspeople had followed the riders to the ranch. They gathered near the fence, whispering as they watched Clara stand beside Elias. Crow turned toward. He described her as a woman who attached herself to lonely men, first Thomas Whitmore and now Elias Reed. He said she had used a child and a false story to gain access to land she could never own honestly. Clara felt the old shame pressing in from. It was the churchyard again. The same faces, the same silence, the same certainty that a woman without money must also be without truth. But this time she did not hold an old case in them. She held Nathan's journal. Crow saw it and lost his smile. He ordered Sheriff Mercer to take the book as stolen evidence. Mercer asked whether Crow claimed it belonged to Thomas Whitmore. Elias opened the cover and showed the name Nathan Reed written inside. Crow recovered quickly. He said Clara could have written the name herself. Then he presented the debt against Reed. The document claimed Elias had borrowed heavily after a failed cattle sale. Amos had signed as witness. Two men standing near Crow swore they had seen Elias place his name. Elias examined the date. On that day, he had been 50 miles north, helping bury an old ranch hand whose family could confirm his presence. One witness said the signing happened in the other said it happened after midnight. Sheriff Mercer asked whether Elias had used his right. Neither man answered. Clara studied the signature. It contained the same narrow R and lifted final stroke she had seen before. Crow had not copied Elias's hand. He had copied Nathan's. She said so aloud. Crow laughed and told the crowd that grief had made her imagine connections where none existed. Clara asked why a dead man's signature appeared on a debt against his brother's ranch. No one answered. Crow's face hardened. He told Mercer that delay would make him responsible for allowing a thief to escape and a debtor to hide property before an auction. The sheriff looked at the county seal, then at the inconsistencies in the witness statement. He said he would not remove Sam until the guardianship order had been confirmed by the judge who supposedly signed it. Crow objected. Mercer ordered a telegram sent to the county court. Elias remained at the. His rifle stayed inside the house. He did not threaten the riders or challenge Crow to a fight. He only stated that no one would cross the fence to seize Clara or Sam without verified authority. If you came for trouble, you found it, he said. If you came for her, you'll leave disappointed. The yard fell quiet. Crow stepped close enough for Elias to smell tobacco on his coat. He whispered that Reed Hollow would be sold by noon whether Elias accepted. Once the ranch belonged to Crow, Clara would have no shelter, and Sam would be taken before sunset. Elias did not move. Crow returned to his horse and announced that the auction would proceed in Coldwater the next day. Vernon pointed at Clara and promised that when the law removed Sam, she would never see him. Sam tightened his hand around hers. Clara did not look. The riders left behind deep tracks in the melting snow. As the crowd dispersed, Sheriff Mercer remained near the gate. He unfolded the debt document and placed it beside a page from Nathan's journal. The signatures matched almost perfectly. Too perfectly. Mercer looked toward the road where Crow had vanished. Then he said the words that turned suspicion into certainty. The man who signed this debt was already dead. If you were standing at that gate, would you have risked your ranch to protect Clara and her son? Share your thoughts below. By dawn, Reed Hollow would either lose everything or prove that every paper Crow carried was a lie. Sheriff Mercer spread Crow's papers across the Reed Hollow kitchen table. Elias remained near the door while Clara seated Sam beside the stove. No one spoke of Crow had built his power on frightened people, disappearing before they could challenge. Clara would not give him that advantage again. Mercer examined the guardianship order first. The county seal looked genuine from a distance, but it lacked the small cut left when the official stamp had been repaired. The judge's name was correct. His signature was not. Elias asked Mercer to record every difference before touching the next document. He did not demand special. He demanded a process Crow could not lay. Mercer noted the false seal, the mismatched signature, and Vernon's failure to identify Sam's birth. He sent a ranch hand to Coldwater to telegraph the county. Until the judge answered, Sam would remain with Clara. They had only a few hours. Crow could still force the auction forward. Once Reed Hollow was sold, he could bury the truth beneath years of legal delay. The ranch would not survive that long. Clara said they needed evidence strong enough to stop the first bid. Elias placed Nathan's wooden horse and the small brass key on. The key opened none of the locks in the office, but Sam remembered the iron box beneath Nathan's bed. Elias carried it into the kitchen. The key turned. Inside lay a leather journal, several receipts, and a survey wrapped in oilcloth. The map showed the western spring, the original Reed boundary, and a permanent water right extending through the valley. Nathan had hidden the original before he disappeared. The receipts recorded payments from Crow to Amos Pike. Some were disguised as cattle. Others referred to copied papers and signatures. One carried the date Nathan was reported dead. Mercer sealed it as evidence. Nathan's journal described ranches Crow had taken through false debts. It named witnesses and officials who had helped him. It also said Clara understood the accounts better than anyone Nathan trusted. Near the end, one page had been torn away. Clara opened the hem of her dress and removed the fragment she had carried for 6 years. Its edge matched the journal. Nathan's words instructed Elias to protect Clara and his son. Beneath them was a line of numbers that appeared to record cattle prices. Clara recognized Thomas Whitmore's code. The numbers identified a bank deposit box in Coldwater. Mercer warned that the bank might close before. A wagon would be too slow, but 3 horses could still reach town before. Clara planned to leave Sam with a ranch family. The boy refused. He had spent too much of his life being moved without understanding. Clara knelt and explained that they were trying to make certain no one could take him. Elias gave Sam the choice to stay or ride under Mercer's. Sam chose to go. Before leaving, Elias told Clara about a southern trail leading to land Crow did not. If she wanted to escape with Sam, he would delay the riders and accept the loss of. He was willing to surrender his land so she could keep her child. For a moment, Clara wanted to accept. Then she remembered Thomas's stolen home, Nathan's journal, and every family Crow had driven. Running could protect them for one night. The truth could protect them for the rest of their lives. Clara chose Coldwater. They reached the bank as the clerk prepared to lock the door. Crow had already ordered every Whitmore account frozen. Clara gave the coded box number. The clerk checked the register. The box did not belong to Thomas's estate. It was listed jointly under Clara Whitmore and Nathan Reed. To open it, Clara had to provide her signature and proof of the Reed heir named in the agreement. Mercer presented Nathan's journal and sealed. Elias showed family records describing the crescent mark carried through generations of. Then, Sam lifted his sleeve. The clerk stared at the birthmark, entered the vault, and returned with a narrow steel box covered in dust. Before he could open it, Crow's voice sounded from the bank entrance. He had reached Coldwater ahead of them, and he had brought the bank's owner. Silas Crow entered the bank as though he had already. The owner, Horace Bell, followed close behind him. Bell was a broad man with silver spectacles and the uneasy expression of someone who had been reminded exactly how much money he. Crow looked at the steel box on the. He ordered the clerk to return it to the vault. The deposit agreement, he claimed, had been created under false names. Clara was accused of theft, Nathan Reed was dead, and a child's birthmark proved nothing. Sheriff Mercer stepped between Crow and the. He agreed that the mark alone could not establish inheritance. It was only one detail: Nathan's journal, the sealed letter, the matching fragment, the wooden horse, and the bank register would all be examined together. Crow demanded that the sheriff arrest Clara before she contaminated more evidence. Mercer asked Horace Bell whether anyone had opened the box since it was deposited. Bell checked the register. The original seals had never been broken. Clara had never possessed the key to the vault. Neither Elias nor Sam could have placed anything inside after Nathan disappeared. For the first time, Crow had no immediate answer. Bell still refused to release the box. He said the agreement required proof that Clara's signature matched the one recorded 6 years earlier and that the child named in the file could be identified. The clerk brought out the original card. Clara took the pen. Her hand trembled once, then steadied. She signed the name she had used before Thomas gave her his protection. Clara Hale. The letters matched the. Crow said. A practiced forger could copy any hand. Mercer turned to the. The young man explained that the card also contained a private question written. Only the account holders should know the answer. The question asked where the cottonwoods bent toward the water. Clara closed her eyes. Nathan had once described the western pasture at Reed Hollow, where 3 old trees leaned over the buried spring, where the valley keeps what men tried to steal. The clerk read the line written beneath the covered section of the. The answer was exact. Horace Bell could delay. He ordered the box opened in the presence of the sheriff, the clerk, and every person in the room. Inside lay documents wrapped in faded blue. The first was a marriage certificate bearing the names Nathaniel Reed and Clara. It had been signed by Reverend Josiah Vale at a small mission church south of Ash Creek. Clara touched the paper but did not listen. For 6 years, Crow had called her a liar because the county office contained no record. Now, the missing record lay beneath the bank lamp, protected by seals no one had broken. Crow examined it and claimed the minister might not exist. Mercer sent a deputy to the church archive. The second document was Sam's birth record. It named Clara Hale as his mother and Nathaniel Reed as his father. Reverend Vale and Thomas Whitmore had signed as witnesses. The child Crow called a Whitmore possession had never belonged to Vernon's family. His legal name was Nathan Samuel. Clara looked at Sam. He had heard the name before, but never spoken in a room where powerful men were forced to ignore. Elias rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. He did not claim him or speak for him. He simply remained there. The third document was the original Reed water deed. It granted Nathan and his heirs permanent control of the spring beneath the western pasture, along with access rights through the neighboring. The deed had been filed before Crow created the debts used to seize the surrounding ranches. If Sam was Nathan's heir, Crow could not control the water without his consent. The plan that had taken 6 years to build had been placed in the hands of a 6-year-old boy. Beneath the deed lay Thomas Whitmore's final letter. Clara recognized the handwriting immediately. Thomas explained that Nathan had come to him shortly before disappearing. He feared Crow had discovered the investigation and knew Clara was carrying his child. Nathan asked Thomas to protect them if he failed to return. Thomas had agreed to marry Clara publicly and give Sam the Whitmore name until the Reed evidence could be revealed safely. He wrote that Clara had never deceived him. She had saved his business, cared for his mother, and treated him with more loyalty than his own brother had shown. Thomas also warned that Vernon would help Crow if money was offered. Vernon's face lost its color as Mercer read the. Crow called the letter the sentimental invention of a dead fool. Then the clerk removed a ledger from the box. The pages listed payments from Crow's companies to Amos Pike, Vernon Whitmore, 2 county clerks, and several false witnesses. Each payment corresponded to an altered deed, a missing ranch record, or a debt that had later been used to force an offer. Clara compared the ledger with the fragment sewn into her dress. The figures aligned. The same coded entry that identified the bank box also identified the location of the original transaction. Crow had not simply targeted. He had built a network designed to control nearly every well and spring between Ash Creek and Coldwater. Mercer looked toward Amos, who had been brought inside. Amos lowered his head. Crow told him to remain silent. That command revealed more than a denial. Mercer asked Amos why he had received money on the day. Amos said he had only delivered papers. Mercer asked which papers. Amos looked at Crow, then at the ledger that proved Crow had kept records of everything. He understood that Crow intended to blame him. Amos began to speak. 6 years earlier, Crow had ordered him to copy Nathan's correspondence and steal samples of his signature. Those signatures were used to create false debts against Reed Hollow. Amos had also removed the water survey from the county file. He denied killing Nathan, but admitted that Crow's men had followed him south after learning he meant to bring evidence to the sheriff. Nathan never reached the next town. No body was recovered because Crow did not want questions about the cause of death. Clara closed her eyes, but she did not collapse. For years, uncertainty had kept part of her waiting. Amos's confession ended that waiting with cruelty, but it also ended Crow's power to use uncertainty against her. The deputy returned with Reverend Vale, now an old man who walked. He recognized Clara before anyone introduced her. Vale confirmed the marriage. He remembered Nathan holding Clara's hands beneath a leaking mission roof while Thomas stood as witness. He also confirmed Sam's birth. The documents were real. The marriage was real. Sam was Nathan's lawful son. Crow moved toward the ledger. Elias stepped between them. He did not draw a weapon. He merely said the evidence now belonged to the sheriff. Mercer sealed every document and informed Crow that the auction would be challenged. Crow smiled again, though less confident. He reminded them that the sale had already begun in the town square. His chosen buyer could complete the purchase before Mercer filed a formal order. A later dispute might restore the land, but only after years in court. Reed Hollow could be emptied before sunset. Clara gathered the copied figures in the original deed. The truth was no longer hidden in a hem, a toy, or a sealed box. It was strong enough to be spoken before the entire town. As they left the bank, Sam walked between Clara and Elias. His sleeve remained pushed back. For the first time, Clara did not hide the crescent mark. Outside, the auctioneer's voice carried across cold. The first bid for Reed Hollow had already. The auctioneer stood on the steps outside the Coldwater Sheriff's office with one hand raised above. Second call for Reed Hollow Ranch. Silas Crow's chosen buyer had already placed the opening bid. Men who had once worked beside Elias watched from the street. Families from neighboring ranches stood near the church fence, uncertain whether they were witnessing a lawful sale or another theft dressed in official. Crow stepped forward when he saw Clara approaching. He told the crowd that a desperate woman had arrived with forged papers, a stolen child, and a story designed to delay the collection of an honest debt. Clara did not answer him immediately. She walked to the auction table with Sam beside her and placed Thomas Whitmore's ledger beneath them. Elias stood at her right. Sheriff Mercer stood at her left. Neither man spoke for the first time since Crow had driven her from Ash Creek. Clara was allowed to tell the truth in her own name. Mercer ordered the auction suspended while evidence of fraud was presented. Crow objected. He insisted the sheriff lacked authority to interfere with a private debt sale. Mercer held up the guardianship order. The county court had answered the telegram. The judge, whose name appeared on the paper, had never signed it. The seal was false. A murmur moved through. Vernon Whitmore stepped back. Clara opened the Reed Hollow debt agreement. She showed the date Crow claimed Elias had borrowed the money, then produced statements confirming Elias had been 50 miles away at a funeral. She placed a page from Nathan's journal beside the signature. The long final stroke matched. So did the narrow capital R and the break where the pen had lifted. Crow had not forged Elias's hand. He had used the handwriting of a dead man. One of Crow's witnesses tried to leave. Mercer's deputy stopped him at the... Clara continued. She showed the feed invoices Reed Hollow had paid 3 times, the cattle Amos had listed as dead, and the records proving those animals had been sold through a company owned by Crow. She showed the original survey of the Western Spring and the newer county map from which the water right had been removed. Crow said ranch accounts contained mistakes all. Clara opened the hidden ledger. Every mistake had produced money for the same people. Payments to Amos followed missing. Payments to 2 county clerks followed altered deeds. A payment to Vernon appeared 3 days before he locked Clara out of Thomas's house. Vernon shouted that Thomas had never married. Sheriff Mercer removed the marriage certificate from its evidence cover. Before he could read it, Reverend Vale stepped forward from the crowd. His back was bent with age, but his voice carried across the square. He had performed the marriage between Clara Hale and Nathaniel. Thomas Whitmore had stood as witness. Vale also identified the birth record naming Nathan as Sam's father. Clara rested her hand on her son's shoulder. This child was never stolen from the Whitmore family, she said. His name is Nathan Samuel. Sam pushed back his sleeve. The crescent mark on his wrist became visible to the people nearest the steps. Clara did not present the mark as magic or proof by itself. She presented it beside the marriage record, the birth certificate, Nathan's journal, the bank agreement, and the testimony of the minister who had known them. Together, the pieces left no reasonable doubt. Crow's buyer lowered his bidding card. The auctioneer looked toward Mercer and refused to continue. Crow turned on Amos. He accused his former manager of creating the entire scheme with... Amos had been brought to the square under guard. Until that moment, he had remained silent. Then Mercer showed him the payment records Crow had. Amos understood that Crow had written down every crime and intended to place the blame on the weakest man. He confessed. He admitted copying Nathan's signature, hiding the water survey, falsifying cattle losses, and helping Crow create the debt against Reed. He also admitted removing documents from the county office after Nathan disappeared. Crow ordered him to stop talking. Ames did not. He told the crowd that Crow had sent men after Nathan because Nathan intended to expose the water scheme. Amos had never seen the body, but he had received payment for telling the family that robbers were responsible. A woman near the church began. Her family had lost a ranch to Crow 4 years earlier. Then another man stepped forward and said his father's debt had also carried fees that did not exist. The silence Crow had controlled for years broke all at once. People began naming ranches, wells, signatures, and auctions. Clara had not uncovered one stolen. She had uncovered the method used to steal an entire... Sheriff Mercer placed Crow under arrest for fraud, forgery, bribery, conspiracy, and attempted unlawful seizure of a child. Crow looked toward Elias, perhaps expecting anger or violence. Elias gave him neither. He only moved aside so the deputy could place the irons on Crow's wrists. Vernon was arrested for perjury and participation in the false guardianship. He was also ordered to return Clara's personal property and Thomas's private papers pending. The two false witnesses were detained. Amos remained under arrest, though Mercer recorded his cooperation. The auction notice was torn down. Reed Hollow was no longer listed as a debtor. The bank clerk confirmed that Crow's companies owed money to the Reed estate, not the other way. The original water deed was restored to the county record. Sam was recognized as Nathan's lawful heir, with Clara serving as guardian until he came of age. Thomas Whitmore's final letter was read aloud. The people who had watched Clara leave the church carrying one small case now heard Thomas describe her as loyal, capable, and more honorable than the men who had called her a burden. No one applauded. The truth was too heavy for celebration. Some lowered their heads. Others came forward quietly to apologize. Clara accepted no dramatic promises. She simply asked that the record be corrected and that no other woman be condemned because a wealthy man spoke first. If Clara's courage and patience moved you, share this story with someone who still believes truth deserves a voice. Subscribe for more stories where kindness stands firm and justice is finally heard. By late afternoon, the square had emptied. Clara stood beside the auction table, holding the papers that restored her name, her son's identity, and the ranch Nathan had tried to protect. She had won everything she once believed was lost. Yet, when Elias asked what she would do next, she looked toward the road instead of Once the legal work was finished, she said, she and Sam would leave. Elias did not ask her to stay. He only looked at her old case and said, "Are you leaving because you want another life, Clara? Or because someone taught you that you were too much trouble to keep?" Spring came slowly to Snow withdrew from the fences. The western spring returned to its old channel, and green grass appeared beneath the cottonwoods. Money recovered from Crow's accounts paid the ranch hands and replaced the stolen. Clara rebuilt the books, but she no longer worked to prove she deserved a place there. The law recognized Sam as Nathan Reed's heir, with Clara guarding his land and water rights until he came of age. Still, she packed the old case. She placed Sam's clothes beside the wooden horse and tucked Thomas's letter beneath them. Reed Hollow had given her safety and dignity, yet she feared that staying would turn gratitude into another obligation. Elias found her in the barn near sunset. "The stage leaves Thursday," Clara said. "Sam and I can find work near." "You could," Elias answered. He did not remind her that Sam owned part of the ranch. He did not say she owed him for shelter or protection. "There is honest work here," he said, "and room in the house. But neither means you have to stay." Clara looked across the yard. Sam was brushing the chestnut mare. He no longer flinched when riders crossed the ridge. What reason would be enough? Elias was silent, wanting this life. He told her he would never ask her to remain because she needed. He only wanted to know whether Reed Hollow had become a place she could choose free. Clara remembered the coffee beside her books each morning, Elias waiting outside Sam's room when the boy was afraid, and the quiet barn where he had given her space to breathe. She had once believed home was a place where papers proved she was allowed to stay. Now she knew better. Home was where kindness did not require surrender. Sam ran into the barn and asked whether Elias would still teach him to ride when the pasture. "As long as you want me to." The boy hesitated, then wrapped his arms around Elias. "Thank you, Pa." Sam pulled away, afraid he had said too much. Elias knelt before him. You call me that only if it belongs in your heart. Sam embraced him again, and Elias held him close. Clara closed the old case. She said she did not want to remain as a guest, a frightened widow, or a woman with nowhere else to go. She wanted to stay as his partner. Elias took her hand carefully, leaving her free to withdraw. When you are ready, I want to build a life where none of us fears a closed door again. Clara looked toward the open barn and the child who had found a father without losing the one whose name he... It became home the day you opened the door. At sunrise, Sam rode between them beneath the... Behind them, the barn door remained open, or 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 remained open.